Working with private equity can be a massive mistake. In today's episode, we talked to Matt Burton, who candidly shares with us his 10 years of experience of working with private equity and what he'd done differently. For anyone out there who's considering private equity as a potential investment for their business, it's an essential watch. Hope you enjoy. So Matt, 2006, you set up Matt Burton Associates.
Yes.
Which skipped forward to 2014. A private equity firm came along and acquired a majority stake in that business.
They acquired 50%.
Okay,
at the time,
at that particular time.
Yeah.
So taking us back then to 2014, what sort of numbers were Matt Burton Associates doing, MBA doing?
We were trending around the 1 to 1.1 million pounds of EBIT at that point, pretty much zero debt. ID facilities back then weren't something I was aware of. So we were doing about 1.1.
And in terms of headcount and that sort of thing?
We were probably 15 to 20 heads at that point. But really lean business because it was effectively an RPO.
Okay. And RPO being, because at one point it was the fastest growing sort of RPO provider in the UK, so and one of the biggest. So talk us through what an RPO, what does that mean? What would you be doing as opposed to, say, a contingent labour recruitment business?
So I think the definition now is probably very different to the definition back then. For me, it was as simple as exclusivity. I did not see it. I'd spent 10 years in corporate recruitment and couldn't understand why recruiters were happy to be 18% productive, which is pretty much the standard in the industry. So I figured I want to be 100% productive, and that meant one client. My first client was M&S Bank.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good starting point.
Placed over 2,000 people with them.
From all levels?
Yes, literally from the 16-hour-week Starbucks barista on site all the way up to chief financial officer. Okay.
And so going back to that 2014, could you, without betraying any confidences, can you talk to us about, so you're a growing business, lean, as you say, profitable. What did the deal look like? How does it happen that a private equity firm and a business of that nature sort of come together? What's the preamble? What are the mechanics of how it all sort of fits together?
So it started off with, it's like anything, it's to do with network. Yeah. So somebody I knew who was already an investment within this PE house approached me a couple of times, tried to introduce me initially to a previous iteration of the platform that the private equity firm were growing out. Got very close, literally 11th hour I pulled out. I just figured it wasn't the right time for me then, because the plan was to buy me and then flip the group within 3 months. That just didn't make any commercial sense to me. So I said no. The same PE firm came back in for me about 6 months later, wooed me. I mean, I felt very, very special. Down on a train, meeting all the bigwigs, came to the conclusion that might as well do it, because the promise was that I would be able to bring my methodology in recruitment across their other brands, which are contingency recruitment brands. So I said yes.
Okay. And so that process of being wooed, as you sort of say, did you go and speak to anybody else, or was it just this? Eyes were focused on that.
Just them. Yeah.
Looking back,
mistake. Absolutely. Yeah. Terrible. I think I realised it was a mistake within year one. But once you're in, you're in. But very much a decision I wish I'd not taken.
Okay. And the mechanics of it then. So you mentioned they had a 50%, they took a 50% stake. So again, just talk to us about how you go from making that decision that you want to do it through to them signing on dotted line and so on and so forth. Yeah. What are the mechanics for a deal like that is?
So we, obviously, heads of terms were put together. I foolishly just looked at the numbers, which was X EBIT times by X multiple. In hindsight, the first mistake I made was not examining the multiple methodology, because I don't think there's a single PE house now that would agree to a multiple of 3.4 for RPO business turning over, delivering a profit line of 1.1 million. So that was the first mistake. Then second mistake was in the heads of terms, there was a clause about not declaring dividends after heads of terms were signed. Now, in that business, I had a director's loan of about £450,000, which meant that once the deal transacted, that £450,000 had to come out of the money that I was paid for the shareholding. So, in essence, the business, new owners, joint owners, ended up getting an influx of cash of 450 on day one and picking up 50% of the business for essentially a multiple of 2.7. Not ideal, man.
Okay, not ideal. So, where do we go from there, Matt? I was going to ask you. I was going to ask you.
Worse.
Yeah.
It gets worse.
But what I was going to say was, so for the benefit of the listeners, where do we? What's the advice there then? So, what's the advice? So, you've been courted by somebody. They've offered you an investment.
Yeah.
Whether it's they're going to completely buy you out or they're going to make some investment into your business. What advice are you giving Matt Burton in 2014, so 12 years ago? What advice are you giving Matt Burton back then, now, with the benefit of your experience?
I would say speak to the equivalent of Matt Burton 10 years later.
Okay.
Corporate finance, legal representatives, they are simply ticking boxes, in my experience now. I think having the opportunity to speak to myself 10 years later and understanding that, because I won't be the only person who's been through a deal as one-sided as this, that would be the thing that I would absolutely do. Speak to not a business that's exited with private equity, but a business that has exited from founder to private equity.
Okay.
That would be my advice, yeah.
Okay, so we're into the first year.
Yep.
When do you kind of realise that it's not quite what you expected? You've had the conversation
about 6 weeks in.
Okay.
Yeah. And it was partly because, as I said to you before, my plan doing this wasn't just about taking that money off the table, which obviously was nice, but it was also because I was going to have access to an entire database of a recruitment business that was 20 years old that had less than 3% per spend of its entire client base. Again, going back to the reason I set up MBA was simply to be 100% productive. I know I could take those clients from 3 or 4% wallet share to 100% wallet share. So the value accretion was going to be huge in doing that, but that never materialised.
So when you say it never materialised, the businesses that you thought you'd get an opportunity to work with, it didn't.
Unfortunately, typical recruitment. Yeah, landing and expanding is not as important as protecting and top drawing. So there was no opportunity. What is slightly frustrating is there were 2 opportunities I aggressively took, and those 2, just in terms of the numbers, went from about 30k GP a year to a 9-year contract with one business that ended up delivering about £3.54 million of GP.
Okay. So the methodology that you had with MBA did work in certain that context.
It was that was me forcing the point rather than being a collaborator with the other business in the group.
And talking from my own experience for a minute, not too dissimilar set of circumstances where I was drawn to a number and what would happen next. To sort of draw some synergy between what happened to me and what you've just described there. What I didn't do is I didn't get it contractually written down that this is the things would happen. It was just a discussion, and my thought process was, well, why wouldn't the other person want to do this? So why would I need it?
I had it in the heads of terms.
Okay, so it was in the heads.
Yeah, literally paragraph 1. It was almost like the pretext to why we're doing this. Mm-hmm. So it was in the heads of terms, but not to the point of it has to happen by this date and in this way. So
it was an understanding. I guess again, just using my own scenario, my understanding was that that's just what would happen. This certain exposure and this way of working collaboratively would happen. Wasn't written down because I just thought in my head, well, why wouldn't they want to do it? Because it's going to be better for them. Actually, when it got to it, it just wasn't a priority for them. It wasn't written down contractually, so therefore it didn't happen. Which again is learning to make sure, I guess, that when you're putting a deal together, those things that are important to you and you think add the value to the deal beyond the money are written down, and it's understood exactly what will happen.
Yeah, I guess it's whatever the rationale for wanting to do the deal, that's what has to be contracted rather than just a number.
And again, the thought that the other person is just going to want to do it because it's better for them might not necessarily be how they're feeling about it.
No, and I think it's fair to say that, again, I won't be the only person who's experienced this, but it's a very binary transactional mentality from the private equity buyer. It's a number, and if they can get the number to be reflective of a smaller multiple that they expect to be able to sell at some point, I get why they do it. It just feels very one-sided.
Okay. I've had other guests on the podcast where they've talked about private equity being a positive thing. So they've talked about private equity money coming in and it being used to invest in expanding globally. It's been used to take them down or realise opportunities that they would have turned down if it had been their own sort of purely their own money. Any benefits from working with private equity?
No. in fact, quite the opposite. I think you used the word investment there. There wasn't a single penny of investment in 10 years. So the money that was invested at the beginning was acquiring 50% of my business for a very low value, in my opinion. I think what then became very clear is that in any of the businesses I ran in the group, because it wasn't just MBA, I bought other businesses within the group, there was zero investment, not a penny. If anything, it's a one-way traffic of management fees every month.
And that's typical of a private equity that have a management fee. What would that typically cover for?
I was paying across multiple businesses that I owned in the group, probably around about 20 to 25k a month.
Okay.
Yeah. Plus dividends. So, at the end, because I only had 34% of my business because there was a further transaction after about 2 years, I think it was. So they were getting, best part, I think, of about £3 to £4 million they got over the 10 years in terms of real cash.
And that management charge, again, for the benefit of the listeners, what typically would that include? So this is where a business has been sold, or a business is working with private equity, I should say, and there's a management charge from the business to the private equity firm. Now, what typically would that cover? What was the what was in that contract, if there was one?
No, there wasn't a contract. I think the only tangible benefit that I saw was access to a shared service legal team.
Okay.
But that was it. I mean, board meetings, yes, but the board meetings, again, you've experienced it yourself, can be quite binary. And sometimes I just felt like I was running a global business because it was all about what are you going to do next month, not where do we want to be in 2 years? How do we take this global? And it's fair to say that I don't think there was a single board meeting I had that was looking to the future.
Okay. So very much about results.
Yes, results.
Here and now results.
Yeah.
Okay. So we're in year one.
Yeah.
We're in month one, month
yes.
two.
Yeah.
We found like we feel like we've probably made a mistake. How do you then go back? 'Cause it was then, of course, it was only last year that you kind of finally parted ways. So you had 10 years in that relationship. So talk to me emotionally about what that's like for you to be in that position where you feel it's not what your expectations were, albeit they probably delivered what was written down, but perhaps you wish you'd had something else written down. What was it like for you emotionally through that period, starting that first year?
Yeah, I think, again, if you consider over the last 10 years, there's been a number of, macroeconomic, geopolitical issues that meant that, frankly, I couldn't dwell on it. Banking crisis, pandemic. So there was a number of times I literally just had to, put foot to the pedal. But those times where, and it often happened when there was a dip in performance, and you felt like you were under the microscope to like an incredible, degree of kind of privacy intrusion was my experience. Not can I help, not what is the next steps to fix this, but no, you've got to do better. You've got to make more money. That I feel was the big missing point for me. There was no agenda of growth and support.
And how were you feeling about that at that time? So what affected that on you personally?
We're going there. Yeah, fine. Yeah. It a lot. Yeah. So I don't think it's a secret because I have shared this on various social media outlets over the past. But I suffered quite severely with mental health issues. A number of occasions. Sometimes just because of the stress of having to perform. Secondly, the stress of having to. There was a couple of purchases within the group that I was pretty much forced to make, and one of those failed. One of those is still going, but actually was in pretty bad shape. But I wasn't allowed to run those businesses, and then I felt almost like I was one thing, which was a cash cow. Which then, as anybody who sold their business might realise, being a cash cow is always an expectation because personally, family, friends expect. But then when you've also got it from the side of the investor, just wanting to take money off the table, it's pretty brutal. So yeah, mental breakdown, serious mental health issues, divorce, all the fun stuff.
Looking back at that time, were you sharing these things with people? What did you was there in a circle? I think we've established there was nothing really at work that you were able to kind of rely on, bounce off and that sort of thing. Were you sharing these things with people? Sharing how you were feeling with people, I should say.
I was sharing it internally with some of the people in my business who I'd, grown up with them. I brought them all into the business. Other than that, no, because pretty much the people I was surrounded by at that time were only after one thing, which was money that I was making. I may have shared it with you, actually. Yeah.
We certainly met. We certainly met around 2014, didn't
yes,
we?
Yeah. So no, there was nobody really to share it with, and I think this goes back to the point I made earlier, which is having access to people who've been through it, rather than access just to those people you're in it with, it is an invaluable opportunity. And I think the beauty of this series you're doing is giving other potential acquirees an opportunity to learn and not make the same mistakes.
And how much do you thinking of that period, how much of it is, you think you've touched on it there, you're in the moment, you're delivering the numbers, you've got the pressure of getting from month to month. How much of it are you sort of stopping and thinking about what impact that's having on you, if at all?
Oh, no, not at all, no.
I guess what I'm saying is the way you've just described what you're going through now, was that how you felt back then, or were you trying to get through it? Were you trying to sort of force your way through it?
I was trying to force my way through it. I mean, the one thing I do is I still know how to sell. So I would go out there and find new clients, win new contracts. But we're talking then about working from 5 a.m. probably until 10 p.m, which has a demonstrable, negative impact on family life, children, access to see me. Yet now I look back in retrospect, thinking I was really doing it, majority of this, for somebody else.
Yeah,
and the reason I set up MBA in the first place was to not be in that position. I set it up in order to do it for me, my family, and actually because I genuinely wanted to do a good job. Whereas I then had to almost take a complete reverse approach, which was by any means make more money.
And maybe let's maybe shift to something a bit more positive. You mentioned there setting up MBA. So what was the motivation? You'd worked in corporate recruitment for a period of time. What's that point? And what was the trigger that made you think, I want to do this on my own?
So there was two things. I won't say who I worked for. Really big firm, really good quality firm globally. I was running the northern regions for them, and the COO and CEO at the time came up for a visit to the Manchester office. And I was sat there in a meeting room. We had back in the day a bell in the office. Somebody
for a sale,
For a sale, somebody rang the bell. I thought, here we go, this could be a good learning for the CEO and COO. So I called this chap in and said, what have you just done? And he goes, you're going to love me for this, Matt. I've just made a £24,000 fee. Go on, talk to me. How? Got the job on, went on to Monster, flicked the CV over the fence, filled the job, and my heart sank in that moment. I figured, is this what we've come to? To literally be that bang average at recruitment. So that was point one. Second point, in the same company, I was working with a iconic UK brand, and they were setting up a shared service centre in Manchester, and I wanted to do it. And I was told by the COO, or the MD at the time, that no, we only do qualified recruitment. And that made no sense to me. And I think this was part of the pomposity of sometimes working in these big corporates, is that you've got to stick to being a one-trick pony. When actually, when I left, I won that business, and 2,000 jobs a year.
And that was the M&S stuff? Okay. Yeah. Fab. So those are the motivations.
Yep.
Talk us through the steps of what happens next. You leave your job one day and you've set up another, and you go with MS the following week. Is that how it works? Or?
Well, yeah, there is a story. So I left my job and decided, because at that point then I was being courted by a couple of other firms, and I was still on the fence. So I decided, I got on a plane, went to Bahamas, and sat on the beach with a friend of mine, and she said, why are you doing this? Why are you going somewhere else? Just set up on your own. And that's what I did. Literally that day, went on to my phone and downloaded a new business name, incorporated it. And so that was the first step. Second step was to not initially go after the client that I think we made our name with, but I decided just to be a consultant to what was then the largest insurance retail high street brokerage in the UK.
Okay.
And gave them consultancy, helped them out with just some talent management activities. And then the HRD at the time said to me, Matt, do you know anybody who can recruit hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of retail staff in our branch network. And I said, yeah, me. And I took that on, signed up a contract, and I tell you what, so I went back to my old house in Lim recently just to have a look at it, and they've still got the 8 phone lines down the side of the house. I had the fax machine in there, 8 phone lines, finally a computer modem that made that awful noise you probably remember.
Dial-up noise, yeah.
And I was working literally hundreds of jobs at any one point.
And who was that for?
That was MBA.
That was
Oh, sorry,
okay.
it was MBA, but it was for Swinton Insurance.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, and that was putting retail staff into their shops.
Yeah, it was
presumably at the time they had a sort of a series of outlets around high streets. And
they had
stuff like
500 odd outlets across the UK, and then I took it from doing the branch work to call centre activity to digital transformation, everything. It literally did everything over a period of about 5 to 6 years.
Now this is really interesting because I think that story will resonate with a lot of people who are listening. That story of I've been working for somebody else. I'm the top biller. I'm right up there in terms of performance, and I made a decision to do it myself. And people's motivation is different. Sometimes a bit of a push, sometimes a bit of a pull, and a combination of both. But that first story of winning a client that sort of puts you on the map is really interesting. It's a really interesting launch point for us, because I think, how does that go? And just talk us through the incremental steps. How does it go from that story, which I think a lot of people will be out there going, yeah, that's me, to a business that is supporting M&S, 2,000 placements across M&S from the very top to the very sort of entry level roles, and then attracts a PE firm's interest through course, and then sort of do it. So there's I think there's a chasm there that needs filling for the listeners if you can.
So the easiest way to explain it is protect. So client 1, protect them within an inch of their life.
Okay.
That means doing everything for them. That means making sure there's no need for them to look elsewhere for support. And then I hired staff who weren't recruiters. I hired staff who were deliverers. And that's one of my biggest learnings over the years, is not everybody needs to be a recruiter. You get account managers, you get deliverers, you get resources, you get marketeers, but they have a job to do and they do brilliantly. So number 1, protect that client. Once you've done that, your case study is phenomenal, because if you consider back then, most people who would look at RPO would just be looking at some of the global players, and that's a pretty soulless environment in my experience, because it's purely SLA driven. So make yourself completely indispensable. Then reach into the network. So that was when the M&S Bank opportunity came along, and my good friend, still now, who was the head of talent at the time, head of HRD and the head of talent, called me into a meeting. I was about to join the Cordwell group, and she goes, no, don't do that. Stick with what you're doing. And here is a bit of paper that they signed, which gave me the contract to work with them.
Fantastic.
So did a number of other large corporates, and just built it into a position whereby this was the most reliable, predictable income stream, because it was longer term contracts. It was low enough margin in terms of the actual per unit cost to a client that actually, why would they go elsewhere?
But you've got the volume, so
I've
it
got the
worked
volume,
for you.
yes. And actually, when you've got the volume, in my experience, again, the profitability is higher than when you're just charging higher fees on a lower quantum of jobs.
So the first payroll company that I had at Pinnacle, I remember people used to say to us, like, you do such a fantastic job, like you pay people on time and correctly. I used to think to myself, well, isn't that the whole point? Isn't the whole point what you're supposed to do? But almost word for word, our approach to that business was to work with a branch of a particular. So we wanted a contract, or a PSL, I should say, in sort of those terms, with a national recruiter, engineering, trades and labour, and IT had 3 different divisions. But starting with the trades and labour, we were started with one branch, and we made sure we absolutely maximised the opportunity there. And we knew everybody, we knew all the relevant moving parts, and we knew what was important to them. And we only really moved on to the next branch. We rolled out the next branch until we'd sort of done that one. To the extent that people used to think they were doing something like ridiculously dodgy. In reality, all we were doing was servicing them within an inch of their life. And
I'll tell you a similar story. So one of the largest building societies in the UK, I started off with them about 8-9 years ago, and said, I'm not selling this model to you. I want to prove a point first. What is your most difficult branch in the UK? And it was Oxford. And Oxford will be, because it's a collegiate town, therefore it's such a transient kind of workforce. You can't build up a talent pool that easily. I said, right, we'll fix it. So I went down myself, wearing an A board. Yeah, not the best look in the world. Ended up going into a well-known high street retailer who have merit sales consultants who I knew would be perfect for this opportunity, and ended up recruiting all their staff in that branch. So one branch nailed it, then another 5, then all 50, then all the call centres, then all change technology and transformation, to the point where this was a 9-year relationship in the end that generated 3.5 million of GP.
Okay. Starting from going down an advertiser with a sandwich board on. Yeah.
Yeah.
Outside the branch.
Yeah.
That is a great story. And so as reputation builds, as we're obviously employing more staff who are coming along, we're servicing our clients, we're moving on to the next client. We're only moving on to the next client where we've maximised the opportunity we've got. What are the kind of building blocks then that make that business attractive to a potential seller in your view? What would they be?
I think one is the fact that staff weren't, I mean, this sounds awfully crude to say it, but it wasn't reliant on the staff. The staff were brilliant back then, but it was reliant on the value of the proposition. So that's point one, because I didn't hire big billers. I hired people who did a specific job in that value chain to the client. Secondly, the fact it was longer term contracts, so you can predict the income streams. They were typically between minimum of 1 year and up to 3 years.
All contracts? Or are you doing per man contract?
Per man contracts.
Okay, everything, yeah.
Yeah. Almost didn't actually, because I turned around to one client when PPI kicked off and said, "Well, I don't like the idea of paying the staff before we get paid." In the end, did it, and it was one of the best decisions I made. I think the third point of value is your margin. Again, if you think the average in the UK's recruitment industry is probably 18 to 20% at best margin from GP, we were knocking in about 45 to 50% margin. All of the things that I think the one thing that probably wouldn't be as attractive now is the founder dependency, because I was the rainmaker. Every client came from me. So I think now that might be less attractive, but it certainly wasn't the motivation, I'd think, for the PE firm offering me such a lowball amount back then.
The senior team, just you at that point?
Oh, yeah.
Was part of the attraction of finding investment that you would be sharing a boardroom table with like-minded people who'd be sort of contributing?
Well, again, as I said earlier, there were a number of things, but one was there was an automatic entry to a massive opportunity. If you think this one business in the group had 20,000 clients, maybe transacting with 5,000 of them, but 3 times a year, 4 times a year, if that, those clients were some of the biggest names in the UK. Those clients were some of the best startups who were scaling up. So why not do everything for them? That was the reason I thought this would have been the biggest opportunity for this PE firm, but they wouldn't step on the toes of the business that would be, the recipient of that goodwill and opportunity.
You mentioned that post the transaction, you made some acquisitions of your own, or some investments of your own. But might have already answered my own question here. How involved in those the process of identifying with those? Again, is there something? No. Is there traits within those you could look at and say they were attractive for a certain reason, or perhaps conversely they weren't attractive because of what you subsequently found?
These weren't external acquisitions; they were internal acquisitions. So one was a luxury retail fashion brand recruitment business that was part of the group, but it was failing, and I decided to make an offer for my group, the MB group, to buy this business. It was agreed that I was then advised, by the then COO, don't do it.
Okay.
Yeah, but I was told if you don't do it, somebody won't be very happy, and obviously that was the person at the top of the tree of the PE firm. So I had to go through with this, and then within probably about 6 weeks of taking it over, I made it literally to the point of like 100% growth. It was loss making, now it was profit making. People were happy, and then I was taken out of that because they didn't want me to miss out on what I was going to be doing in MBA, and that business failed. Second one was bought out just after COVID, which was also within the group, and again taken out of the running of that business. So it was just about raising money, these acquisitions for the PE firm.
Okay, so looking back then, the way you did have a positive impact on that business is just again talk to us about what it was that you went in and what were you looking at and how did you make that? How did you make significant changes so quickly?
So some of the context is important in that the person who was previously running this business as the investment director of the P firm was pretty brutal. And, you don't rock up in a Ferrari outside the office and then walk in and tell people in very colourful terms, make money or get out. So it wasn't it was a low bar. Yeah.
So staff morale presumably was...
So morale, yeah. So I made this, and people were going to leave. And when I said I will acquire the business, I spoke to each of those people individually, some of whom are still my very good friends. Yeah.
Okay.
Second thing is be present, yeah, and don't do what's happened to me, which is just make money. How are we going to make money together? So I was in the London office twice a week with them. We would go through a very methodical approach to who do we want to work with, how are we going to work with them, what is going to be our mechanism for winning that client exclusively. And we were flying. We were about 15 staff at that point, knocking in about 60, 70k of EBITDA a month. I had taken my eye off the ball in the main business, MBA, because it was put under the stewardship of a new MD. Then because it was struggling, it was my fault apparently, and therefore I was told by a private equity firm, you need to get back into that business and we need to have somebody else run the business in London. And it all went. It failed.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that presumably that reflected on MBA. So as the owner, that had an impact on the overall.
Oh yeah,
group.
I mean it was a 650 grand investment that was written off the balance sheets because it went. Now, as it turns out, some of the people who were involved in that actually then were allowed to stay and set up their own business within the group, which was exited for about £1.5 million.
Okay, so there was a. How did that make you feel?
Yeah, pretty rotten.
Yeah.
Not good.
So at this point, we're what, halfway through the 10-year tenure? It was roughly halfway through. When was that? When did those things happen?
So that was about 6 years ago.
Yeah.
Then the exit of the business that span out of that was a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, maybe.
Okay.
In the interim between that period, obviously we've had pandemic, so the world shut down. And even with the pandemic, I refused to allow any of my staff to be paid furlough wages. Every single one of them was topped up to their salary, which went against the entire grain of the attitude of the PE firm, which was no, give it to staff, cut costs, furlough only. Mine was the only business in the group that topped everybody up because I refused to sit in what was then my nice big house and see them struggle. That did not go down well with the board, and I think that was the time where things started to really turn.
Okay. So what happened from that point then?
So from that point, it was a case of the boom coming out of the pandemic, all that pent up requirement, things going really well, and then a desire by the board: we want to sell. We want to sell. They were trying to raise money, and then I was put under enormous pressure for about 18 months to get to a figure of 1.8 million of EBITDA so that we could sell the business. They already had buyers being lined up, and the pressure was uncontrollable.
How did that manifest itself then?
Manifest itself in me making grave errors, going through divorce, and pretty dark place.
Thinking about that time then again, so you're not sharing it with anybody at that time. There's nobody close to you. Clearly, as I said, partner. But if that's been affected, how did it affect your relationships with those closest to you?
Well,
I guess the question is, how does work when you're that sort of full on? And I know, Matt, we've obviously known each other for quite a while. I know that when you're doing something, you're doing it 100 miles an hour. You're fully invested in it. How does that affect your relationships with those sort of closest to you?
I think if I reflect on that, it's not as simple as me going, well, I should have been better or I should have paid more attention. The reality was I was trying to keep the house. Yeah, I was trying to make money. I was trying to create the value that people wanted me to create. My issue with it is that everyone knows who I am. It's not like I suddenly became a million miles an hour. And what it would mean is I would take myself away. I would work solidly. I'd be sat in a different corner of the house, just cracking on with stuff. and that becomes a convenient excuse, I think, for lack of presence from some people, as opposed to good work ethic.
Significant others, three children.
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah.
And again, thinking back to those periods, what was it like for that? What was your relation like with the kids?
During the chaos period, which was about 3 or 4 years ago, where things were really quite dark, my youngest was too young to know. My son, young enough but old enough to see what and make his own conclusions over time that Dad is a good guy. My eldest daughter, very difficult impact on her, and still is to this day.
And do you think, again, going back, that they're seeing you or not seeing you, as the case may be, sort of during that period?
I think if I go back to before the acquisition, the Matt Burton then would have been still working hard, but actually not feeling he was working for other people and under that kind of pressure. It's the pressure, Matt. That's what it is. What it boils down to. It's the knowledge that if you don't hit a number, then you're going to go. A stern board meeting take place. If you want to do something that is for the greater good long term of the business, you can't do it because the shareholders want their dividends. Yeah. And so I always had this angst over, why didn't you stop taking your 20 grand a month or whatever it was, and let's invest that in creating this new model. And I've always been very lateral thinking. Not being able to do that meant that I was increasingly frustrated, and therefore that frustration almost certainly demonstrated or manifested itself, within the home.
Okay. And again, thinking about things that, for people listening, that they could have sort of done differently. Is that, for instance, just one of the things you mentioned there, if you hadn't hit it, so you're working with private equity, I should say.
For
private equity, it's a partnership on paper, but you're feeling like it's very much one-sided. What are the implications if you don't hit a number, for instance? So, we've talked to people on this series where it's been sort of sweetness and light. It's kind of like we had an opportunity to take investment, we did it, and then 5 years later we reached this number or this target milestone, sold the rest of it, and it went and go. That is clearly isn't what happened with you. What kind of private equity business or anybody investing in you, what are the implications if you don't hit a number, having had that sort of discussion, that type of investment?
Well, there was no positive response to it. That's categorical. More often than not, it's a very kind of binary approach of, you need to do the number, not how can we help you do this number. Secondly, you will get almost an accelerated desire to take money through dividends, which is something over the last year and a half I said no to, which again didn't go down well. I think you've also then got the feeling of forever being watched, and it's quite intrusive. But I mean, all they needed to do really at any point was turn around and go, let's talk about the ideas, let's talk about how we do this. Because I think if that had happened, there were so many opportunities to grow the business into real scale, but there was no appetite to do that.
And again, I guess my question was more, what are the implications for you personally if you've signed a share, or anybody listening to this? I'm thinking of getting into an investment partnership with a private equity or anybody else. There's a shareholders agreement.
Yes.
So the shareholders agreement that determines kind of what can and can't happen. What happens if one party doesn't fulfil one side of that? What's the implications of that? So you said you were always very sort of always fearful of what the implications.
Well, I was fearful.
Does that mean they could throw you out of the business? Does it mean that they could bring somebody else in above you? What are the implications of that?
So the lever provisions typically in these contracts can be really onerous, and to the point where they can sack you for gross misconduct or terminate your employment because of a disciplinary matter, i.e. you're not performing, you're not hitting numbers, and they can be as brutal as you lose 90% of the value. Now I refused to do the deal based on that and put in a 4-year cap on that point.
Okay.
When I then sold some more shares and took equity in the Topco, that didn't materialize. Those provisions weren't transferred over, novated into the new agreement. And I didn't realize, and so essentially they could at any point take my shares back if they weren't happy with me for zero.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we're back to that, making sure, I guess, that in the initial deal phase, in the initial heads of terms, the initial discussions, making sure that whatever it is that is important to you in terms of future clauses, be it performance, be it what happens on exit, all these sorts of things, they're documented in a way that's, you know, at the time can feel, having been through these things myself, it can feel like you're just going over the same point over and over again, but it is important to get to that point to make sure that what you expect is written down.
Yeah, and I think the best way to explain it is have the mentality of what could go wrong. So if I'm at day one and by day 1,000 I want to have exited the deal, then what things can go wrong? Could they get rid of me? Could they take my shares off me? Could they drag and tag me along with another purchase? Could they force me into a sale? I mean, I would be reflecting on every single one of the what could go wrong points and then seeking advice from somebody who's been through it.
Okay.
Lawyers, I don't think, will give you that advice because theirs is very much transactional. It's the founders who've been through it, and there's plenty of them.
I think again, my experience for my sort of 2 pence worth, a lawyer will often, I often come out of meetings with lawyers feeling like they were able to write down what I'd actually come up with and thought about and sort of had the idea and sort of thing, which is fine. It's probably their role, but yeah, a really good lawyer, and there has been a few that I've worked with over time, will give you a bit of insight, will give you a bit of sort of steer, and based on their experience, based on the things that may or may not happen, but also with a tinge of sort of commercial reality. So, you know, you and I could sit here now and worry about everything that's ever going to happen to us and try and insure against it or get a lawyer's document against it. In reality, you need somebody to say to you, listen, these are the key things that are really of a concern to you. So leavers provision, I think, is a massive one. How distributions are administered and managed, I think, is another really important point. You've already said you weren't necessarily aware of how your director's loan would be treated post-completion and what the dividend policy was going forward, which is distribution. So what decisions can be made with or without your consent or with a majority or unanimous decisions being made by the board. These are the sort of the key points that you could really fall out about.
Yes.
Whereas some of the things that a certain lawyer might say, well, you need all these provisions in. Actually, in reality, how important are those to you?
I think the consent points, they're fairly standard, and I get those. It's more when we talk about the provisions, it's more how do I ensure that I won't be responsible for my own downfall, simply because I haven't done something that they wanted me to do. Now, if I do something myself that is entirely my responsibility, then so be it, But there's just too many grey areas in the contracts that I've seen. Now, as it turns out, I was able to get those taken out of mine at the time, but then they pop back into the new agreement 4 years later. I still maintain that you can't think of everything. Lawyers will think about what's only pertinent to it being a legal transaction. Having the ability to speak to somebody who's been through it would be an invaluable experience.
And so I guess brings us quite neatly to what you're doing today. So what have you finished with that private equity firm last year, September last year?
August, September,
August, September last year. So what have we been doing since?
3 months of working stuff out, followed by
personally or sort of getting straight in your own mind.
Personally, just trying to work out what I wanted to do. I've got a couple of things that I do. One is I'm a consultant, so I support recruitment businesses and adjacent markets in helping them grow, not in this consultative way of a NED where it's meet once a month for half an hour. I'm hands-on, so I will help them take a client from 4% per spend to 100% per spend. Second thing I'm doing, which in fact you might be the first person I'm telling formally about this, in 24 hours I'll be announcing a tech product I'm bringing to market as well, which is designed by recruiters for recruiters to have a seamless cradle to grave tech process.
So a CRM or more than a CRM?
So a CRM, AI in there, but not AI to make recruitment soulless, but AI to support quality shortlisting, web chats in there whereby can be interviewed, AI to recognise people's behavioural motivations through that, all the way through to onboarding, compliance, and so on.
Fantastic. Okay, we'll look forward to seeing that announcement then.
Right.
Just you've touched on something there about your approach to consulting, which is clear we're all we're all sort of a product of our experiences.
Yeah.
So straight away you were keen to kind of point out, I think, that this isn't kind of me coming sitting in the board meeting charging you a day rate and then disappearing and writing up some notes and see you next month. So that came across loud and clear initially. How do you see the sort of the consultancy world going now? For we're speaking on this series to people, some of who are still working with the recruitment, some of whom have kind of taken it a full step back, but their approach to consultancy seems to be different than it perhaps was 10 years ago. So how are you sort of tackling it?
So my view is being born out of my own experience of sitting in a boardroom with fairly ineffective support, and that was never going to be something that I could then, deliver as a service to others. So what I've realised over the years is I am terrible at so many things. Yeah, but the one thing I'm brilliant at is value proposition for clients. How do you make a client want to only be in a relationship with you? And that's been born out of my entire career. So that's my focus. So what I'm consulting on is not a broad array of I'll help promises, but I'm going to help you take those clients from here to here.
And that is going into clients who have got existing relationships with, going into recruiters with existing relationships with clients, looking at what their wallet share is and looking to simply increase that.
Yeah.
So the example we gave before, where you started with one opportunity and you grow it into an exclusive account.
Yeah, and it's a bit like, taking it from a one-night stand to a full-blown long-standing relationship.
Marriage,
yeah.
Okay. And how's that going? How are you finding that?
What, marriage?
Yeah, that approach to consulting. How are your clients reacting?
I think really positively. They'll be their own voice, I'm sure, but already had a lot of success in a couple of the businesses I'm supporting, whereby these things aren't difficult to do. By the way, if you've got a client who's willing to listen, a client who's already spending money elsewhere, what is not to like about a better relationship? Now, it does mean a shift change in some people's mentality over what is our job, and I think that's my learning over the last 28 years in recruitment is recruitment's not about hiring. That's just the output. The recruitment industry should be about all those things that go into a human capital strategy to make a business the best employer possible. So that might be their employer value proposition, it might be their onboarding techniques, it might be their talent pooling and their talent pipelining. All of those things and more is what it takes to do a proper job. In my experience, recruitment then is easy. I mean, literally the easiest job, I think.
And I think going back to when I asked the question about what it was that made MBA so attractive to a potential suitor, you said that the tenure of your relationships with a client, the margins you get as a result of having that almost exclusive, or in many cases exclusive relationship, that is hugely attractive to a buyer, isn't it? So concentrating on fewer clients but getting more from them, it adds up to the right thing.
Yeah, and I could show you if we had time, we don't a mathematical equation to prove this, but my fees historically over the years have been at least 35% lower than the average fees. We're not talking search fees here, so this is not me trying to be cute and going, instead of 30% is 20%. No, I'm using 15% as the benchmark.
Okay.
So we're talking minimum of 35% less than that. Typical fees between 7% and 14%. Yes, I was still making 50% margin on that.
And presumably that's because fewer clients, you need less people in the back office, for instance, and all that sort of stuff?
Well, no, actually, what it is because you've got exclusivity. The biggest problem around costs and recruitment businesses is that you're having to hire a lot of more people than you need in order to deliver 20% of the time. And it never made any sense to me. So if I know that I've got a client 100% committed, then I can have fewer people wasting time on trying to fill 80% of work and not get it done, and focus on your job is to nurture candidates, your job is to onboard them, your job is to be the interview and process manager, and everybody's in their swim lane doing it perfectly, and it's so much more profitable.
Makes a lot of sense. A lot to be learnt there, I think, isn't there?
I hope so.
Taking us back then to last year. So when I've spoke to people previously on this series, they've talked about having a plan or not having a plan. You and I have talked at length about the fact that I didn't have a plan. I was running 1,000 miles an hour, got to the cliff face, and then basically jumped off rather than having a gradual sort of run off down the hill. It sounds like your sort of plan post completion, some of those things came actually while you were still working within the business. How's it been kind of second time round? So actually having a dead stop now with the private equity firm and moving on to something else. How's that been? How have you managed that process?
So emotionally, a relief. I think despite the chaos of it, I don't think I've felt in a better place than I do now, because it's a proper weight off my shoulder. Secondly, I'm no longer having to do it for other people. I'm doing this for my clients without having, Big Brother looking over me. Yeah. Thirdly, I'm able to do the thing I'm good at, which is client development, rather than trying to, sing the theme tune, write the theme tune, act in the program. So the plan is very much centered around a more singular approach, which is what I enjoy doing, and it make a big difference.
Where does it end up? Where's the goal for you next then? So
the goal is that the vision I had way back when I did the initial transaction was, I believe that there's an opportunity to build a group of businesses who are like-minded, common DNA, where they are small to medium-sized recruitment businesses who don't compete with each other, but do work in a very similar way for similar clients. That was my vision for the group, which is why I did it. Now, I think long-term, that's something I'd like to investigate, and basically bringing people together so they exit together, and not a buy and build in that kind of traditional sense of buy cheap, sell the group at an aggregated, inflated price. I'm talking here about people working with each other in a much more collegiate way.
It's amazing, isn't it? So when you and I first met around sort of that 2014, 2015 mark, we had similar vision. I had a similar vision in that payroll space where we could bring people together. Now, we went on and did that to a degree. It started off with private equity. We realised that there wasn't going to be enough. Various legislative changes meant that the margin in that market sort of shrunk, and it was much more about compliance, management, and adding value to the supply chain, as opposed to previous to that, it had been about sort of tax efficiency, and therefore margins were easier to charge because there seemed to be a more tangible benefit to the contractor. But we started private equity and then we bought them out. What was really interesting about our deal was that the private equity firm that we were involved with didn't know our market as well as they would do, say, recruitment. So they perhaps didn't have the same leverage over us when it came to a sort of transaction, say to them, listen, we're going to sort of buy you out. But we then went on to build that, as you've just described there, that series of businesses that were complementary, added different things to the group each time we acquired them, but all under a sort of a common way of working, certainly a common set of values. And that went from Walker Smith and became the Worker Group. So in the end, we were attractive to a buyer because we had not just the traditional umbrella CIS, self-employed, and sort of accountancy services, which were traditional contractor payroll, but also back office and international offerings, which other people didn't have. So that made us more attractive because we were slightly more diverse, but it was all done in the same way. It was all delivered in the same way.
I was going to say, I think what you pointed out there is the truism of my approach, which is, don't just give the client what you want to give them. What does the client need, want, and would get value from? That has been my entire MO throughout my career.
And I think the other thing to say is, if you've got a suite of products that you're able to offer that client, we found this bit slightly more difficult. I'd be interested in your take on this. Slightly more difficult that we were known for, say, umbrella, for instance, initially. So once you had an international payroll, it was a real sort of door opener for us. But we didn't perhaps get the cross-sale across, say a business that came to us for global. We didn't always get their umbrella business, which was quite interesting. There was often a feeling, this is where we needed a Matt Burton, of course, to sort of tell us how to do it properly, but there was often a feeling that an agency or a client wouldn't necessarily want to put all their eggs in one basket, possibly. How would you have tackled that?
It's the eternal question that people will ask themselves. And actually, I think it's partly because historically, recruiters have kind of sown this seed that, we do something really different. Yeah, we have access to people that they don't. It's nonsense. Yeah, maybe 20 years ago when people actually had drawers in their office and they could,
Yeah.
draw the
Filofax and
CV.
stuff.
And,
Yeah.
I started off with a Kalamazoo system,
Yeah.
literally a flip card.
Yeah.
Maybe back then, but not now. The real question for me is why would a client not want to do it? Now, if it is because they see that as like they're all eggs in one basket, which I get that, but then demonstrate to them that actually what they're getting isn't just all of the eggs in different baskets, but that plus more. Because what I think that lots of them do is see that you're offering them another product rather than offering them a solution. And so I've always been focused on solution, not product. Product manifests itself through understanding what they need. Reality is, once you give somebody what they need with quality, pace, good value, what's not to like?
I really think this is such an interesting view that you have, and obviously one born out of huge success, with some really massive clients over a sustained period of time. I do think a lot of us get into that mindset of I've done a good job of that, thank goodness for that, thank God for that, I've made my placement, I've hit my target for this month, so I'll worry about next month's, in a few weeks time. I've done that, sort of relax and things like that. Your mindset is very much that should be the real tip of the iceberg, and actually that first placement, that first, in my example, that first payroll that you've run for something should be the start of getting all of that business, unless it's a very, very, very good reason why.
And it doesn't happen overnight, man.
Yeah.
I mean, we're not saying, you have a good week with a client and you can go in the following week, but you do need to treat it as if it's, going back to the very poor analogy of personal relationships. You're not proposing after one date, but what you are doing is creating a relationship, demonstrating that you are somebody that person doesn't want to be without. You're indispensable. Thirdly, listening, paying attention. All these the things I should have done years ago. No. And so paying attention, being present, adding value. Doing all of that is a journey. It's about building that relationship up, and it's not difficult. No, it's not difficult because you need to be genuine with it, but you can be genuine with it if you're not having to focus 20% of your energy on 100% of things, as opposed to 100% of your energy on 20% of things.
I would usually typically ask somebody what they would do differently in their journaling map, but I think we've covered that probably quite extensively. But perhaps a better way of asking that question would be, what would you, Matt Burton 10 years ago, got themselves in a good position. They are potentially being courted, or they're thinking about doing something. In terms of investment or even a full exit. What three bits of advice are you giving them in order to potentially avoid feeling the way you do today about what your journey?
First one is don't get in awe with the bright lights. Yeah, a number, a price isn't a value point. It's simply potentially money in the bank. Yeah. So you think that through the mechanics of, am I really worth that? Now, I'm not saying therefore you're asking for a load more money, but am I doing this because I need to be worth £1.4 million? No, I'm not. And I wasn't. I was doing it because I thoroughly enjoyed the job I did and the difference I made. Second thing is, make sure you know why you're doing it. Is this a 5-10 year decision, or is it simply to rely on others to then see you with your final exit in 5-10 years? Because if you do that, it won't happen. Thirdly, speak to people you trust.
And how would you go about sourcing those people? How would you, if you were again going back 10 years, how would you be going out and finding the people who've done that, done these things to enable to put you in that position?
Well, I'm older, so I know loads of people. Well, we're in an industry, aren't we, where everybody knows pretty much everybody else. There will always be somebody in your network who either has been through it or knows somebody who's been through it. And I would take that time to just consider, who can I get some real world advice from?
Fantastic. I think that's really sound advice. Matt, that was an absolute pleasure to have you this morning. Really enjoyed speaking. We could speak all day, I'm sure. But yeah, thank you very much for coming in.
Cheers, man.
Cheers.
Nice.